All right, I'm going to go ahead and get the stream going. All right, let's kick this, man. Julio Rosas, man, thanks again. Welcome back to the Former Action Guys podcast. For those that didn't catch your first episode, you were on episode 75. I had you on because not only are you a journalist and you're covering riots and stuff, but you were in the Marines too. You were a Marine Air Ground Task Force MAGTAF. It took me, I almost forgot it for a second. MAGTAF planner. Yeah, for sure. So you're a MAGTAF planner in the Marines, and then at the same time, or Marine Reserves, and then at the same time, you are a journalist covering for Town Hall Media or townhall.com, going around, covering the riots and stuff like that. So again, welcome back to the show, Julio. You want to introduce yourself and your what's your kind of background a little bit, like for those that haven't gone back to 75 and listened, which I encourage everyone to do, and then we can get into some questions about what's going on recently.
Yeah, no. So I'm the senior writer over at Town Hall Media. I worked at the Washington Examiner. Dropped out of college, moved out to DC at the beginning of the Trump administration. I knew it was going to be a crazy time, and I felt confident enough to jump and kind of head first into all the madness, and obviously to be correct with just everything that's happened within the past 4 or 5 years. And it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, for sure. It's been an interesting, like the last year. I picked up your Twitter page, which I always recommend to people that if they want to get like decent news or they're tired of some of the more garbage news that's out there, to go on Twitter and follow like specific journalists rather than like an outlet in general, and then follow their coverage, because people like you're wading deep into these riots, like filming and asking questions and stuff like that to show what's actually happening on the ground. And for me, I would rather see something like that than a talking head come on and regurgitate the same, talking points that everyone's kind of talking about, rather than, what's actually happening on the ground. So I don't know what your opinion on that is, rather than following certain outlets, follow specific journalists. And do you have any, what journalists do you follow?
Well, so I mean, I would just recommend that people definitely get a variety of news sources. The reason why I enjoy working in conservative media is just because we are open about our political leanings, and the reason why we're able to exist and thrive is because there is an audience out there, a very large audience, that doesn't appreciate the kind of condescending attitude that some of the other mainstream media outlets have, in terms of, oh, well, we're actually nonpartisan. Politico, one of the editors of Politico on CNN yesterday said that they promised to have the same vigor and nonpartisan type of reporting that they had with Trump. They're going to do the same thing with Biden. Well, not a lot of people agreed with with that promise, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of following individual journalists, I mean, that's fine. Obviously, Twitter and other social media apps are good for that, especially just because it depends on the content that you're looking for. But I think that it's fine to, and well, it's more than fine, but you should definitely seek out a variety of news sources, and especially I kind of have more respect for the liberal outlets that are open about their bias, places like Huffington Post, and because at least they're acknowledging that's their political leanings. Okay, fine. But then, like I said, in terms of you kind of want to avoid some of the other outlets that present themselves as neutral. They say they are, but their actual coverage of things and framing of stories, and I believe I told you that last time, that in terms of media, the real problem with media bias is not necessarily fake news, because while that does happen from time to time, it's more issue with framing and how they frame stuff. Because if you put things into a square when it's supposed to be a rectangle, obviously it's not going to work. It's not going to fit.
Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of journalists that I follow, I follow. So a lot of my friends are journalists in the DC area, so I follow people like, oh, geez, Stephen Gutowski, the Washington Free Beacon. He's a great firearms reporter over there. I also follow quite a bit of commentators too. I mean, because that's what Twitter is just meant to be.
Same. Yep.
It's just kind of your own things, and obviously I kind of curate my feed to be just a little bit more on the newsy side than the opinion side. Even though I throw my opinions on stuff that I'm not covering live at an event. Typically, I try to avoid that at least. I mean, it has to be like something like so crazy or like so out of for me to like really say, hey, this is what I think, instead of, hey, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just Twitter's fun. I mean, it has its issues as with a lot of these big tech
Yeah.
companies,
It's
but
all social media,
it,
right?
it's all social media.
Do you find that your affiliation with like conservative leaning outlets hampers like the dispersion of your or distribution, excuse me, of your like coverage, or of your videos and images that you get at these different events that are happening around the country, like when you go to these riots and stuff? Or, I mean, you tell me, have you seen a pretty across the board like usage of the media that you produce?
So I wouldn't say in terms of in terms of like me personally, in terms of people who work in the mainstream media saying, "Oh, he works at town." I mean, at least they haven't. I haven't seen that being vocalized. That might be happening internally or whatever. But in terms of distribution per se, is like that's the reason why it may not get the reach it should get. I wouldn't say it's not necessarily because of where I work. It's more of what I'm covering, and so obviously I've gained a following protests that were violent and were being perpetuated by people who were not Trump supporters and people who were more aligned with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Antifa slash anarchist type
Mm-hmm.
movements. And so obviously the mainstream media didn't want to pay that much attention to it. And obviously they covered it, but they didn't have the same type of, I would say, enthusiasm of covering said thing. I mean, yeah, they could say they covered it, but in terms of just the over the topness that you kind of see with other things, and then I kind of compare that to the Capitol riot, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was there, and that's we'll talk about that later. But a lot of my tweets, a lot of people who had never interacted, and I'm talking about reporters and journalists
Mm-hmm.
who had never interacted before, um, they were more than happy to share those videos of the Trump supporters rioting. And in particular, there was a video that I got of Trump supporters attacking these journalists and camera crews that were
Mm-hmm.
set up uh, not too far from the Capitol building. That got shared. That was probably one of my most popular videos in terms of retweets and quote tweets.
Yeah.
And because what and I think because that is kind of a validation of their arguments and kind of rhetoric we've seen about, oh, Trump calling the press the fake news is going to endanger journalists, and then we kind of saw that. So I think that definitely played a role in it. It didn't matter to me in the sense of, oh, I'm not going to cover it because I don't want to. It happened,
Yeah.
so I recorded it and I posted it because that's my job. But it was pretty interesting to see, and actually, I'll say, a CNN producer for the first time ever, for the first time out of all the riots and all the places that I've been to last year, CNN reached out for the first time to request permission to use one of my videos from the Capitol riot.
Okay. So
It's just like, well,
that's good though.
I can, I sure, I guess, but it's just like, there was all these other stuff that happened, and you never reached out to that before. And then you compare that with Fox News, where they were asking for tons of videos from last year and from the Capitol riot.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of in terms of bias with that obviously was not the case because they were asking for my video permission to use my videos in all types of cases. It didn't matter, and that's because it was news. I mean, that it was
Yeah.
newsworthy stuff that was happening. So it's a little quite it's quite interesting to see that for the first time happen.
When you give your permission to, let's say, for CNN to use your video, is there caveats with that, or do they have blanket permission to use it in like whatever way they want, like in an opinion show, or can you be like only this show can use it? Like, how does that work?
Typically they it's not also just not like cable networks, although that is kind of the case. But you can they kind of just have blanket agreements that you would just agree to. And so since I'm not a freelancer, because that's how freelancers make their money is
Mm-hmm.
they license their footage, and so you can kind of get into the weeds with that. So typically I just say yes, yeah, you have permission because it doesn't matter to me, and because town hall wants it's good free advertisement
Yeah, because you guys
essentially.
keep your logo up in that.
We had the logo up there, and so really the only caveat is credit to me and to Town Hall, and so they just say yes, and it's like, all right, you're good, all right, you're good. In terms of specific shows asking for run into that, it's just really it's just on Twitter or an email standard corporate account
Mm-hmm.
asking for permission. Just like I said, it's kind of just like a blanket user or like permission agreement that we can use in all in perpetuity and all that. So it's just and of course half the time they're asking this. I'm in the middle of, of all this crazy stuff happening,
Yeah.
so I gotta have to like I have to prioritize what I'm doing, and so half the time I don't even see them just because they were messaging me while I was in the middle of whatever crazy thing I was covering.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's got to be weird because you're kind of always on the go. Like you're as a journalist, you always have to be looking out for that next story. So I imagine it
Oh
takes you
yeah.
like moving around. Real quick before I get with the next question, hey, for the people that are watching the stream, feel free to drop some questions in there. Julio's been through a ton of different riots, and we can go through some of the more, I guess, popular ones, if you will, and then talk about the Capitol Hill. I would like to, before we start talking about individual like circumstances or events, I would like to know how has your personal like coverage of riots changed, or how do you approach it differently because you've been doing it for a year now, like actually getting into the mix of like, I mean, you're there when people are getting shot, you're there when there's things being burned down, all these things are happening. It's got to, in your own mind, you have to, I imagine you've kind of changed your tactics on how you cover these events. Can you go into that?
Sort of. So I mean, I've been covering protests since 2015, and it started out
Yeah.
with college protests in terms of a conservative speaker coming to campus, and then the libs get all and then they it just get all crazy. And so that's kind of how I started. And then I really got hooked onto it when I was covering the RNC and the DNC protests in 2016. And so I was pretty straightforward there too in terms of just neutral. It was just kind of, hey, this is what's happening. In January of 2020, I covered a pro Second Amendment rally in Richmond. And one of the things that was frustrating about that rally was, surprise, surprise, the media's coverage of that rally. And it started the day before, and there was rumblings and there was kind of secondhand information, or I don't want to say secondhand information, but there was a lot of claims putting the cart before the horse, essentially, where they were automatically declaring it to be a white supremacist rally. There's going to be racists there. They're going to come with their guns and intimidate the legislator and the assembly. And so I was really frustrated with that, just because these were baseless claims, and one of the only evidence of Nazis coming was there was, I think, three Nazis or white supremacists, I don't know, but they were arrested before the rally happened because they had made threats that they were going to do something at that rally. And so the rally was being held by the Virginia Citizens Defense League. The founder and the president, he's denounced racism. He denounced it to me when I asked him about it at that day. It was I think it was on the 20th. And so obviously it's hard to claim that Nazis are going to be at the rally if they get arrested before they actually get there and they're denounced by the official organizers. of said rally.
When
So
you say there were three there, like how can you were those like three like in uniforms they had like regalia on?
No. There were three. They were arrested before the rally happened.
Or yeah, I mean the three that got arrested though. Like how do they identify
It,
those guys?
I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked too much into the case. I just know that was an example that they're using.
Mm.
The mainstream media was using to say, "Oh, this is attracting white supremacists and people that are going to cause violence." And like I said, the reason why they're arrested is because I believe they were making threats online or
Gotcha.
it's been a while. It's been a while since I've looked into the case.
Yeah, yeah.
But so anyway, so I went to that rally specifically to debunk that sort of narrative. So I was highlighting all the minorities that were present. I was highlighting, I was asking people what they thought about white supremacists and neo-Nazis and uh, how they felt that this rally was being advertised as something that it wasn't. And so that was probably one of my most opinionated, because it was specifically set out to debunk a narrative that was happening out there, and it was also happening as the rally was going on. I just wasn't aware of it just because I was on the ground and working.
Yeah.
So, kind of fast forward to what in May of last year, I kind of then just kind of stuck back to covering things straight, injecting my opinion on it. I do kind of know. I do remember that I sent out a tweet um, when the third precinct was being abandoned by the cops, and I was just so shocked that they were just leaving. Uh, and so I sent out a tweet saying, like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And then I put in all caps the precincts being abandoned. Whereas everything before that was just kind of just straight, no extra capitalizations or anything. Kind of like, this is so insane.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of as is, but it was just because I had never seen that before. They're just completely abandoning.
So you were on the ground for that?
Yeah, I was on the ground in Minneapolis, the 27th through the 30th, 31st.
So what was the mood like? What was the mood like before they abandoned the precinct compared to afterwards when they burned it down?
Well, so the reason why they abandoned it is because they couldn't hold it.
Yeah.
There was so to kind of rewind a little bit. They were peaceful during the day. There
Mm-hmm.
were peaceful protesters. I mean, they were getting a little animated. They were saying "fuck the cops" and they were using kind of that, but they didn't take any kinetic action by and large. There was some infighting within the group because there were people trying to prevent some of the more agitated types of people who wanted to fight against the cops, and they didn't want that. They said that they didn't want the cops to have an excuse to respond with force, because obviously that's what they were going to do if they were going to start attacking the building.
Yeah.
But as often as these things go, the peaceful people left when it started to become dark, and then you have these different people, these different set of people coming in, and there was a lot more of them in the evening. And so there was a fence put up around the third precinct,
Mm-hmm.
and so the crowd started at first because it looked like the cops that were on the roof were gone. And so they were getting closer and closer to the fence, and then they started to shake it, and they did tear it down at the front of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, while that was happening, they were throwing glass bottles and stuff at the precinct. And so after that had went on for about a minute, that's when the cops then came out to respond, because the reason why they were concerned about a perimeter breach was because, and I heard this throughout that evening, was that people wanted to burn down the precinct with the cops still inside. So the officers were trying everything in their power, short of using actual lethal force, to prevent them from getting inside. That went on for about, I would say, an hour. Just cops shooting tear gas, rubber bullets. I don't remember pepper balls, but all sorts of stuff, short of using live ammunition. And so that went on for about an hour and a half, and then because it was around 10 o'clock Central, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
when all of a sudden just a large convoy and a lot of them on foot, because at the fence in the front was torn down.
Mm-hmm.
The riders then tore down the fence in the back towards the motor pool, and so Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, he ordered them, instead of ordering reinforcements to the precinct, he just ordered everyone out, and so that's when we then saw them leave. And so once they left and they were being attacked as they were trying to leave, because as often as there are in convoys, there was a bit of a traffic jam
Yeah.
between all that. And so there was, and these are just regular SUVs. There was one Bearcat towards the back, but you could just hear windshields shattering from all the rocks that was being thrown. You could hear the rocks hit the bodies of the cars. And so once they left, as minimal as that police presence was that day, there were at least cops around. But then once they left, there was
It was just mayhem.
It was just mayhem, yeah. And so at first they were celebrating, the rioters. They were celebrating, especially once they got the thing on fire in the front, and they were saying "fuck 12" and this is the start of the revolution and all that. And it actually was really funny. There was one guy who said, "We didn't want to do this." They, meaning the cops, that they made us do this. It was like,
of course,
okay, buddy. And so they were setting off fireworks. I mean, it was a bit, you could say, with all the people there close together, you could say it was a COVID super spreader event, but we can't really say that because it's a very smart virus. It doesn't spread.
It was never, yeah. That's, dude,
it doesn't spread at those types of events. And so they were celebrating, but then they just were going to other buildings that had survived the previous night, and they were setting those buildings on fire. There's a lot of businesses that were broken into, and then the worrying part was that because previously everything was focused in that kind of couple blocks radius of the third precinct, and when I flew in that day, downtown Minneapolis hadn't been hit yet. Well, once the cops left and people started to follow, and so it was Lake Street was kind of the main drag, which is in southern Minneapolis. And so they were just kind of marauding around and attacking people, and they were breaking into stores and they were setting fire. So Lake Street was hit pretty hard after, because that was Thursday. Yeah, Thursday, Friday, a little bit on Saturday. And so that was a problem with pulling the police out, because once they gave them that victory of taking the precinct and setting it on fire, well, you think they're just going to go home after that? No, they're going to go and do that to other places. And people were saying, oh, well, this is justifiable because at least they're attacking the police precinct. Okay, if you want to think that, all right, but the issue is they then attacked people who had nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically enough, a lot of the business owners, small business owners, we're not talking Fortune 500 companies here, a lot of the small business owners were minorities themselves. So that was kind of a interesting thing to see firsthand.
Were you seeing, you talk about like being at the precinct and seeing like the crowd celebrating that the cops are abandoning. And I remember watching the video of those cops pulling out of there. It was pretty wild. Just out of the blue, they just start, like you said, a convoy just rolling by through this crowd to get out of there. And it was kind of insane to see. Was there anyone in the crowd that was trying to like pull people back, like quell it a little bit, like bring down the temperature? Or was it everyone was on the same page of like, fuck this, we're burning the place down?
Yeah, that was only during the day.
Yeah.
In terms of people trying to stop others from being violent. Once it became night, and especially once they got the fence down, they were all on the same page. And like I said, they were definitely intent on setting that building on fire with the police still inside.
That's crazy, man. That's so crazy. So I picked up your stream. I picked up your like Twitter page and started following when you were in Kenosha, because I saw the video of you reporting in front of like I think it was a furniture store or something was burning down, and you were, and that's
Yep.
yeah, and that's when I was like,
The
oh, this
NL.
dude's got an EGA patch on his press, flak jacket or whatever you guys call those. I was like, oh, this dude's a Marine, so I'm gonna reach out to him and see what it's all about. And correct me if I'm wrong, weren't you there when Kyle Rittenhouse shot one of those dudes when he fell to the ground? Was one of those videos yours that came out?
Yeah. So talk a little. So yeah. So skipping forward. So that
Yeah,
was in August, late August. Covered some other stuff. I'm trying to think of if there was any major riot after. I don't think so that I personally covered. Portland was still kind of ongoing at that time.
Portland. Yep.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Portland. I covered some of the Portland riots at the federal courthouse in July. I was there towards the end, and so then, yeah, so I was at home on Sunday the 23rd,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering correctly. Just checking Twitter, getting ready for the work week. It was about 4 p.m. And then that's when I saw video on Twitter showing Kenosha police officer shooting Jacob Blake in the back 7 times. And so right away I was thinking, oh boy. And the thing is, I actually knew about Kenosha beforehand because I'm from Illinois, from
Okay.
the northern parts of Illinois, and I'd actually been to Kenosha a few times because it's right across the border from Illinois. It's about 20 minutes after the state line, and so I emailed my bosses. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna stay up late tonight. I'm gonna watch this, see how people react to it." And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking like, this is gonna be bad. And at first, I thought he was dead because I mean, how do you survive
Yeah,
7
for sure.
shots to the back point blank range? But he did, and so. But it took a while for that information to come out. So a lot of people did assume, oh, he's dead, and it's not unreasonable to assume that. So that was, and of course they were saying he was unarmed, uh, which wasn't the case, as we later found out. And so right away, I mean, Kenosha it's a town of 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that big. It's a lakefront community, and it's just the police there just were not able to
Yeah, they weren't ready for that.
handle that type of they weren't ready for that in the slightest. And so I was watching the live streams, watching the county courthouse. I saw Drew Hernandez's video. Who was the first one there that night, in terms of conservative type of reporter. So I sent them another email and I said, "Hey, we gotta go. I gotta go." So I left. So I flew out first thing Monday morning, and I was with Jorge Ventura. He's with the Daily Caller. He came out there with me as well. And so, yeah, then we saw just the riots just continue and continue and continue. And so that's why, because the governor, Democrat, only requested about 200 National Guardsmen initially to respond to, and they didn't arrive until about 10 o'clock
Mm-hmm.
on Monday night. So the police were still very much overwhelmed with just trying to protect the county courthouse, which
Yeah.
is a pretty big building, in the kind of the town square kind of area in downtown. And so that's why the rioters were able to, because they at first were attacking the cops, but once they deployed tear gas, and a lot of them didn't have gas masks, and so they left and just started to just go crazy
Mm-hmm.
in the downtown area. And it was actually kind of concerning because there was two gas stations literally right down the street, and so there was concerns that either A, they're going to have easy access to start getting gas, which there was one guy that I interviewed that said they were getting gas canisters to go do who knows what. But also too, that with all the fires that were going on, that it could potentially catch the gas station on fire. And I mean, that would have
Oh,
been
for
just
sure.
absolutely
Yeah.
devastating if that was the case. So, so that so it was just crazy. And so because there was repeated days of that, that's why some people took it upon themselves to be armed to protect the remaining businesses, that had survived miraculously the previous nights. And so that's why people like Kyle Rittenhouse were there. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, particularly with
Hmm.
him since he was underage, 17. There were a lot of other people there. I mean, and I saw it firsthand the previous night before that because it was 25th. Yeah, so it was the 24th. I saw people using guns to protect businesses, and they didn't have to fire a shot, thankfully. But so
Did they actually stop anyone though? Were they actually like
yeah,
when you say you saw them
yeah, yeah,
protect
yeah.
it? Was it more than them standing there,
They,
or was there like actual like, hey, get the fuck back kind of deal?
they were because there was one thing I learned about Kenosha. There was a lot of car sale lots within just like that few block radius, and so that first one that everyone has seen being on fire, that was just gone.
That's crazy.
So people started to go target the other cars in the other car lots, and so I got video of one of the armed civilians. He was actually an army vet. I interviewed him uh, at another time, but he they were starting to attack the cars in that lot. Said, "Hey, get the fuck off the car!" And they scrambled, and so he went into the parking lot to make sure that they were really gone. There was one. I think they set one of the company's tow trucks on fire. So that was one of the only cars that was set on fire at that particular lot. There was some damage because they were throwing rocks and kicking and doing all sorts of stuff. So I did see firsthand that people were using guns legitimately
Yeah,
to protect. And I want to stress that because again, these are not. It wasn't some Porsche Porsche dealership. It wasn't some Cadillac dealership. It was just a regular locally owned car lot. And so
that's crazy,
then we
man.
so there was more armed civilians came out on the 25th. And
Hmm.
so there's a lot of misinformation just regarding that night. And so the first thing that people have to understand is that it was not a protest on the evening of the 25th. It was a riot. The whole reason why that situation was allowed to happen in the first place is just because, again, there was not enough. I don't know if there was enough cops. There wasn't the will on their end to do anything about it, or they had orders. I mean, to not intervene. Those are the three kind of scenarios that I can envision.
Hmm.
They, the crowd that had gathered that night, once again attacked the county courthouse first. They were the first ones to take action, and so National Guard and the county sheriffs came out to get because they had erected a fence, similar like we saw in Portland.
Hmm.
They had erected a fence during the day to protect the county courthouse, and they were inside. And so once they started to attack the fence, they actually almost did shake it down. They almost did take it down, so that's why they came out. So then it was kind of another thing where rioters would throw things at the cops. The cops would respond with tear gas and more bullets and all that. They pushed everybody out of the park across the street. The issue is they didn't arrest anybody.
Yeah.
And so the rioters just left the park and into the street. So then they started using the officers started using the Bearcats. There was about three of them, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. Three of them.
Which are the armored vehicles, right?
Yeah, the armored vehicles. They were pushing the crowd back block by block, but they didn't. But they were only coming in from one direction, so people could easily just move back and still have fights with the cops.
Hmm.
It then got to the point where the rioters were then pushed into the armed civilians who were protecting the gas stations, particularly, and some of the other local businesses nearby.
Mm.
So the only reason why the shootings were able to happen is just because there wasn't, for whatever reason, the cops did not take enough action to actually arrest the people who were being violent, which was a lot of people at that point. And so it was just a situation. I'm not saying it was a situation that could have been avoided entirely, but it guaranteed was going to happen when people, regular people, are going to step in and fill the void. And I'm not, when I say bad things, I'm not saying people using firearms to defend private property is a bad thing. I'm not saying, I'm all for Second Amendment. I've done some interviews with people in Minneapolis who use guns to protect their livelihoods, and again, they were Latino, so minority-owned businesses right there. It's just that, unfortunately, it then led to a situation where a 17-year-old had to take the lives of two people and then injuring a third, right? And that's just what happens in the chaos of everything. And I mean, it's just, again, I'm not saying the whole thing could have been avoided, but the governor need that, because President Trump was telling, before the shootings, was telling Wisconsin, hey, you need more you need more law enforcement, you need more National Guard, and he just didn't want that. And so this is what happened. When it's just chaos and anarchy, things are going to happen. And so now now we have the Rittenhouse trial.
Yep.
I think it's going to be in July or August. But so I was up the street, kind of at the point where the cops had stopped advancing and the rioters stopped moving back. So it was kind of weird. It was just kind of like a 10-minute lull and everything. It was really quiet. They were just kind of looking at each other. And so initially I thought that everything was going to be over at that point. I thought, all right, well, because some people had, the crowd had gotten smaller. Some people had gone home, but there's still a sizable amount of people. And so all of a sudden we hear gunshots coming from the south. And so that was when Rittenhouse shot Joseph Rosenbaum after Rosenbaum was chasing him. And so one thing that doesn't get enough attention with this whole thing is that there was tons of other shootings that were going on at the same time.
Really?
Oh yeah. Rittenhouse wasn't the first one to fire his weapon. There was a guy across the street, and I can't say his last name. It's like Polish or something. But I had filmed him earlier in the night when the rioters and the armed civilians were having verbal fights with each other. I saw he was on the rioter side and he was brandishing a handgun. And so later, a couple minutes later, he was down the street, and so he fired. It looked like he fired in the air, and so the guy was behind Rittenhouse. He was across the street behind him. Rittenhouse was running into the car lot, and he was kind of trapped because of all these cars are tightly packed. And so he turns around, he hears a gunshot, and so that's what I believe it looks like. That's what changed him from going in from flight mode into fight mode, because then right as he's turning around and he's hearing a gunshot, Rosenbaum is right on his ass, and Richie McGinnis, who I know, he's a friend of mine, said that Rosenbaum was lunging for the rifle, and then that's when Rittenhouse let off the 4 shots. So I'm up the street while all that's going on. So acting as the rational person I am, I start running down towards the gunfire, and what was kind of surprising too, a bunch of other people were also running towards it. I guess they were just excited and wanted to see what was.
They got to get those Instagram videos, man.
A bunch of other people just shot. Poor dude comes up, and I can't say for sure if he hit Rittenhouse at any. He swung at Rittenhouse, and his skateboard flew out of his hand off to the left. Huber had hit. I don't know for sure. When Rittenhouse fell down, that's when people were. Well, I heard one guy say, "Get his ass," and so then one guy who we still don't know who he was to this day. One guy did like a drop kick move, and Rittenhouse fires twice. He misses him. While that was happening, Huber had run off to get his skateboard, and then he darted to the right. And right after jump kick dude landed, that's when Huber then comes up, and he does hit Rittenhouse either in the head or like in the shoulder. He hits him, but because he was running at him with such force or so much momentum, he kept like he couldn't stop himself to like continue beating on him. So as he was still running after he hit him, he was reaching behind him to grab the rifle again. And then that's when Rittenhouse popped off one round and hit Huber in the chest. And then I saw Huber fall down. At this point, I don't know what's about to happen. I don't know if other people with other guns are going to start shooting and there's going to be a lot of crossfire. And I don't know if other people are going to start grabbing onto the rifle and Rittenhouse is just going to start popping off rounds to try to scare them away or whatever. And the reason was the helmet earlier because I for a couple of hours I wanted to give my head a rest. And so I was filming with my right hand and my helmet was clipped to my right side of my backpack. So I was trying to, as all this was happening, I was trying to like reach over and trying to unclip it, but because I was so focused on trying to get the video, my hand, and so I start backing away down an adjacent, and then all of a sudden I hear more gunfire. Except this time it sounded like it was coming from in front of me and from behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And then at this point, people really just start scattering and going in all different directions. And so the other thing at the time, my ballistic vest that I had gotten was only rated for handguns. And the reason why I did that, because one, it's just lighter, obviously. But also, two, when you're in the inner city, and in the inner city, or when these riots were going on, the main thing I was concerned with was rubber bullets, just because I had been hit with one, right here in Minneapolis, and so I didn't at the time I thought, well, I'm not going to need rifle plating for that because that's my main concern, and if there are guns being used at these things, there are most likely going to be used handguns, so I should be good. Well, then Kenosha comes around, and obviously Kenosha and Wisconsin as a whole is not is a very much a gun-friendly state, and so there's rifles and shotguns being brought to this, and so I was really concerned that errant rounds, either from Rittenhouse or from someone else, using rifles, and it's not going to do anything to stop that. And so I start backing away. I'm trying to find some hard cover. There's almost nothing to be found that I could get behind, and so I behind the car, but it wasn't great because the engine, like the cover, the side I took going in front of me. So if people were shooting from in front and back, I could still get hit. It could only protect the side, and that's just because I didn't know where to go. I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. There's multiple gunshots, and I couldn't really ascertain where they were coming from. Part of that is just because I didn't have a firearm on me, so I in self-defense if it was going to get to that point. Mm-hmm. So and like I said, I was still trying to, and I thought like my head's exposed, like damn it. And of course, I just thought of the generation kill. Seeing from Sergeant Six, that helmet wasn't yours to lose.
Yeah, right.
all this stuff, but it's like I haven't lost it. I just can't get to it. And so after Rittenhouse shoots Age, a gross, I can't say the last name. A lot of Polish and Eastern Europeans out there
in Wisconsin, yeah.
And so after he shoots Gage, because in the video that Brendan Guchenschwager, I know how to say that one, because he kept running alongside Rittenhouse while I was backing away. So he got better video than I did, or he got more video than I did just because I stopped recording after a certain because you could because where I was backing up, you couldn't even see what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He Gage point his handgun. Well, so at first he had his hands up. And Rittenhouse points his rifle at him. He doesn't shoot him at first, but then Gage darts to the right and points his handgun, and then Kyle just shot first, and so that's when he destroyed his upper bicep. And so I decided to go. Then the cops, who were up the street the whole time, start rolling in their MRAP and their Bearcats, not MRAPs,
Mm-hmm.
and their Bearcats. And so I start going to the street parallel to where everything had happened on the main street. So it's more the residential area. As I'm walking up walking down that street, I hear more gunshots from somewhere. I don't know. It was probably about another 5, 6 shots. Rolling in heavy. They started to establish a perimeter around the scene of the first shooting. Some people were still around, and I was trying to find Shelby Talcott, who was also with the Daily Caller, because that's when I found out that Richie was at the scene of the first shooting. And at first, he's at the hospital because he took somebody there, and I'm just like, what is going on? Why is he at the hospital? What? And so then I finally saw video. When I finally found Shelby, she showed me video that showed everything that happened, and that's when I realized that, like, oh shit, he was right there.
Yeah.
he was really close, and so we were just trying to figure out what to do, and so we went to the hospital. The hospital was really right across the street from where all this had gone down, and so because at that point Richie was talking to the cops, he was interviewing them, and I think at this point it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, give or take. No, it was probably 1 o'clock, yeah. And we waited outside the hospital for a little bit, trying to figure out, how we're just trying to process everything we had just seen. The adrenaline that had been pumping through was starting to finally
Yeah.
starting to wear off, and that's when everything just kind of like hit me. It was just like, oh, just saw someone die today. That was a new one, and so I was trying to think that, and then at this point, my phone starts blowing up with messages from Fox News, like, "Hey, can we use your video?" I was like, yeah, I guess. And so,
If real quick, if you're there in the you're in the mix of everything right there, how is your videos getting put out? Do you have a runner that you're passing off like SD cards to, or are you stopping every once in a while and uploading footage and then continuing on?
yeah, I'm just uploading footage as I go. It's just multitasking.
Yeah, on the go. Do you have a
Yeah.
hotspot or something you carry around? Just upload from your laptop, or
I just use my phone.
oh, sick.
I just do everything from my phone.
What kind of camera do you use?
This is the iPhone
Oh,
SE.
oh,
So it's just
literally everything. I thought you meant because like I have a DSLR you can connect to your phone, but I didn't. I thought you had like an external camera.
This is my moneymaker right here.
That's awesome, man. It's crazy how technology's changed where you can do that. So,
yeah,
what were your thoughts, or did you even see it? You said you saw the cops coming down the street after Kyle had shot the final dude. I think one of the biggest pushbacks on the response there was that he was able to walk through those police and then beyond, and actually went home back to Illinois before turning himself in.
Yeah.
How? Can you explain maybe why the cops did that? Did they know he was the shooter, but you said there was more shooting happening afterwards. Were they pushing him back and then continuing on to where active gunshots were going on? Can you kind of explain that situation?
I mean, you have to listen to the radio transmissions and obviously interview the cops that were there, because Brendan, he got video of Rittenhouse trying to surrender. He was trying to say that, like, hey, I just shot people.
Yeah.
And the cops are screaming at him through to
keep
go
moving,
away.
right? Yeah.
You keep moving, and so, I mean, yeah, and like I said, there's other shootings happening. So, and so either they just didn't my only guess is they didn't know that that was him because I mean I don't know how good their field of vision was from up the street. It was
You were right
perpendicular
there.
to. Well, yeah, I was just perpendicular to that, so I don't know if they were even paying attention
Yeah.
to what was happening, and so again, I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions
I guess I'll let us.
when it comes to when it comes to stuff like that
I guess we'll learn more about that stuff like once the actual trial and
during
everything occurs.
during the trial. Yeah, yeah, and so and like I said, the whole thing is the fault of the state and local leadership of that because they didn't request the necessary resources to bring in law and order. I mean that was just I mean honestly that could have everything could have stopped on Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
Like seriously. Obviously Sunday things broke out the night of. They weren't prepared. All right, fine. Things happened like that. But at that point, this is month 2, 3 of riots. So it's not like this was the first riot that had happened. This was happening all over the place. And so
Yeah.
they know what the playbook is to put down the violent gatherings, not the peaceful ones, because there's no need to do that. For reason they just dragged feet. And I actually remember the county sheriff. He said yeah, we had our wires crossed, and so we thought we requested the National Guard, but it turns out we didn't actually officially request it. And everyone was like, well, "What does that mean?" He's like, "Oh, well, our wires are crossed." Like,
That's a ridiculous answer.
you should probably figure that out, because this is happening all over the place.
That's
so
like
you should probably
that's just straight
know how
admitting
to.
incompetence. Like
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm saying. There was incompetence. There was just a lack of leadership, strong leadership at the state level and the local level, and then you have Trump saying, "Hey, we will send all." And so, of course, after everything that happened, then the governor finally agreed to have the extra federal officers, more National Guard. I think there was. I want to say there was definitely a couple thousand by the week's end, and more would come out. And so it's just. I don't know. It's just frustrating to see when you because I knew exactly what was going to happen in terms of just I didn't know the exact specific incidents, obviously, but you have a pretty good guess on what's going to happen when things like that when incidents like that happen, and so to just kind of drag their feet and get all political because obviously it was an election year. They had just hosted the DNC. Well, the DNC was virtual, but the main headquartered of the event was in Milwaukee the week prior. It was during the Republican National Convention of all that. So, I mean, Democrats were just reluctant to accept Trump's help because it's Trump, and which is just sad because, like, no, you got to.
Yeah,
they
didn't want to give him a win.
Yeah, they want to give him a win. They wanted to say, "This is Trump's America under all these rights." It's like, but most of these were happening in Democratic strongholds.
So the critiques that you're laying out there that hey, the local and state law enforcement and National Guard officials weren't properly prepared, because of whatever, is the same kind of critiques that people are laying on the Capitol Hill Police and the DC National Guard and stuff like that. And before we get into that, and I want to talk about that too, for sure, obviously, I know between Kenosha and DC, you spent some time up in Portland, where the federal courthouse was under siege for 100 days. And I guess for those that maybe haven't seen any video from there may think that saying under siege is kind of strong language, but like when you see the videos of these federal police officers that were sent there to reinforce the courthouse, taking people, chucking fireworks at them, people chucking, bottles of whatever kind of fluids at them. And like the actual, like they were trying to catch that courthouse on fire as well. That in my mind kind of equates to a siege. What was your take on what was happening in Seattle and then the coverage of that? And then from that, obviously, I want to move into the Capitol Hill riots and how that was covered in comparison. Because it's for those that don't know, when you say something's an insurrection, like this is being labeled as, and don't get me wrong, I think the Capitol Hill people were assholes. I think that was a bad thing to do.
Oh yeah,
I completely
absolutely.
denounce that. However, if
Yep.
that's an insurrection, so is sieging the federal courthouse, because an insurrection, or trying to, an insurrection is just that, trying to take federal property by force. So I'd
Yep.
like to know what you saw in Seattle, or excuse me, in Portland, and then kind of compare and contrast that, and we'll move into Capitol Hill and how that day kind of went.
So yeah, no. So the courthouse wasn't under siege for 100 days. That was just
Okay.
that was the city in total. So really, the courthouse. So at the start of everything in May, Portland loves to riot, and so once
Yeah.
The George Floyd incident happened, they got their excuse to riot.
Once again.
And so initially, they were only targeting the Justice Center, which houses the county and the local law enforcement. It's in the same area, but the Antifa groups out there were mostly focused on um, targeting the local and the state level type buildings. Towards the end of June and towards the beginning of July, they started to shift their focus to the federal courthouse. And so, former acting secretary Chad Wolf of DHS
Mm-hmm.
about it, and so he was saying that they were monitoring it in June, but then the Federal Protective Service was saying, yeah, everything's fine, we have enough resources. But then towards the beginning of July, they said, okay, no, this is getting more. This is becoming more violent. There's more people, so we're gonna need help, and so that's why extra federal officers were sent around the July 4th holiday. And so, yeah, no, it absolutely was a siege. And really gatherings in the park. And this is something I'd never noticed before, but outside a lot of courthouses, there's a lot of parks literally right across the street. And so that's where people go and gather. And so there were peaceful protests during the day, again, as these things typically go. And then at night, that's when they started to become violent, and it, yeah, they weren't just throwing. I mean, they're not throwing like sparklers. They're throwing these heavy duty
Commercial grade fireworks. Yeah.
commercial grade fireworks, and then in a couple of cases, they were throwing actual bombs,
Yeah.
and that's something that people don't. I mean, I wasn't there for that one, but on the video, you could hear it. It is a loud big explosion compared to the other, because fireworks are just mostly like lights and stuff, and yeah, and it is pretty dangerous when it's that big, but this was an actual bomb
Mm-hmm.
that they threw at the courthouse. So they put the fence up around it, and they were using hacksaws, they were using bolt cutters. There was even, I didn't get a video of this, but someone was using a buzz saw trying to saw their way in. So I mean,
That's crazy.
they were just relentless. And of course, I mean, they were organized. They had their shield formation. They had their leaf blowers to kind of counteract the tear gas, which was kind of funny, because then the federal officers came out with their own kind of heavy duty fog machine to just blanket people with tear gas.
Jesus.
And so it was just a back and forth. And one thing I want to stress again, just like what I saw in Kenosha, is that from when I was there towards the last week in July, the FPS gave multiple warnings for the crowd to stop being violent. They gave them multiple saying, hey, if you continue doing this, we're going to declare this unlawful assembly and we will respond. And they were like, fuck you, and get out of my city. And so the rioters continued. And so after they gave multiple warnings, that's when the cops then came out to push them away from the fence, because, like I said, they were trying to break it down and trying to breach the perimeter so that they could get closer to throw and start more fires and all that. And so at the time, the local police, the Portland Police Bureau, they were not allowed to coordinate or communicate with the federal officers. So the federal officers were on.
Yeah.
And that, again, that's culpability on the local leadership and even state level, because you had Kate Brown saying, oh, there's federal invasion. It's like, well, this is a pretty crappy invasion, because they're just stuck in one area, because that's their jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of the building and the block or two, I assume. Like, well, this is a pretty terrible invasion. And so it was just stupid. Again, it was just so unnecessary for it to get out of hand. And the only reason why it did is just because the local and the state leadership didn't want to give Trump a win. They didn't work because I'm here, I'm
Hmm.
seeing, and yet everyone wants to act like
Yeah.
I was there when finally the Oregon State Police was able to reach an agreement with DHS to saying that they were saying, oh well, it was only violent because of the federal response. Well, once the federal officers left in August alone,
Hmm.
that was declared by in places other than the federal courthouse.
Yeah.
Because and that's what they did. They just went to different precincts each night. They went to I mean, they went to all these other
It's like,
forest fires. So they wanted to act like the good guys. The Antifa groups wanted to act like the good guys and provide aid to people who were evacuating. And so that was like one of the only times when Portland was spared riots. But of course, that was only because they were being threatened by this big ass fire.
yeah. Yeah. It's just, Portland is crazy. I mean, like that's like you said
No, it's
before.
not America.
It's like you
It's
said
not.
before that gives them the reason. It was their reason to riot that day. I mean, the Portland riots are ongoing. You know, there's still stuff going on there like all the time. But you,
Yeah,
like you
I
said, we
mean,
don't really hear
there's
about it.
stuff happened last week, just last week,
Yeah.
and obviously, you know the newsworthiness of it. Okay, fine, but I mean, innocent people get caught in the mix, and that's my biggest thing to highlight is like, hey, okay, you want to take on the system, okay, fine, whatever. Like, if you want to view yourselves as doing that, okay, but then when you target random people who have nothing to do with whatever grave it is, then you've lost. You have no credibility to say that. Oh well, it's just we're fighting the system and the evil. It's like no, you're just targeting whoever, and they just
Yeah, you're just an
don't want
asshole.
to. Right.
It's like now you're just an
So
asshole at this point. It's
so so
I,
that was Portland.
I
The
like I
sixth.
like how you real quick. I like how you brought up the how they labeled the federal officers that got sent there, especially like the BORTAC guys that came up to as
Yeah.
that quick reinforcement, as stormtroopers, as Trump secret police, you know, all these horrible things that
True.
they would never now call the Capitol Hill police officers or anybody that reinforced the Capitol during the riots. They would never say anything like that to them, even though it's the exact same situation. You know, and that's like for me, that personally was like what I saw as like one of the worst things ever was how they were just putting down the federal, you know, officers that were there just to do their job. It was just absolutely disgusting in my opinion.
Right. And so in my view, all riots are bad. I mean, that's been my view from the start. And so the thing that's frustrating for me was in terms of a Capitol riot is just that, well, one, it wasn't the first time a government building that houses one of the branches of the U.S. government was attacked.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, during the summer, there were riots outside the White House, and the U.S. Park Police, about 60 officers were injured in those
Mm-hmm.
riots. Dozens of Secret Service officers were also injured and attacked during that time.
They
The
damaged that
White House had
church
been
out
on,
there.
yeah, the White House had to be put on lockdown. President Trump had to go into the bunker. and it was met with mockery.
Hmm.
And they were saying, "Oh, they called him a bunker bitch," and they were upset that the rioters didn't get into the White House,
It's just crazy.
and that's because people on their side, more or less, were the ones doing it. And then now we go over to the Capitol building, and they rightfully are upset about that because it was just a terrible thing to do, and I was there, I saw it,
Hmm.
and so it's just you have no credibility to Democrats and people in the mainstream media in particular. They have no credibility to be upset about it because last summer they were either ignoring violence that was happening, they were and like I said, they were making fun of President Trump because his safety and the safety of the officers that were protecting the White House and the complex were in jeopardy.
Hmm.
So my experience with what happened on the 6th, I, I I was at the Ellipse to at the start, which is by the White House, to kind of hear President Trump speak and just see. That was fine. And then I got a text from a friend saying they're heading towards the Capitol building. And I'm like, all right, let's go over there and see what happens. And at the time, I was in my full riot gear just because that's just my standard operating procedure now. Because you don't know what's going to happen. And now after Kenosha, for ceramic plates that's just what I have to go with
It's
now.
crazy.
I took the level 4 ceramics, my backpack, my helmet, all this other stuff. It's just like that's kind of a long walk. It's gonna be a long day, so
Hmm.
I took the metro. And there's a station, Capital South Metro station, that is on that's on the house side of the Capitol Hill area. As I got closer to the actual building itself, that's when I start hearing screaming. I hear metal banging. I'm just thinking, like, are they storming the grounds right now? And so I started running because I wanted to see what's going on. And then yeah, so I saw they just pushing aside the barricades. They're ripping down some of the construction fencing, like just like the fencing that's just meant to section things off. It's not actually meant to like hold people back,
Hmm.
just because they were having construction for the inauguration. Um, and so I thought, oh, all right, I guess it's gonna be these guys riding this time. And so yeah, they were getting in the fights with the cops, the Capitol Hill police, the DC police. Those were the only two agencies that I saw for most of the day. It wasn't until much finally started seeing I saw FBI agents because the FBI headquarters is not that far from Capitol building. And just all National Guard didn't come out until like 5 p.m. and this was happening around 11:30, 12. So the officers, talking about what you said earlier with the leadership problem, absolutely. And that was clear with Capitol Hill Police because you have to keep in mind that this isn't the first time there's been protests. They didn't have the numbers or the people willing to actually go and breach it. And so they just the Capitol Hill Police leadership just thought, oh, we'll just do what we always do, and we'll have a couple of cops out there, non-riot gear, with the easily move metal barricades, and that should be enough, right? No, no, not at all. And so most of the officers that were responding after the perimeter of the complex, not the building, but the actual grounds, were just in patrol uniforms.
Hmm.
That was a problem because a lot of the rioters were using pepper spray and bear spray and all sorts of stuff, and they were hitting them. And and so whenever they got pepper sprayed, they had to come off the line to try to recover from that. Who you are, it doesn't matter how many times you've been pepper sprayed or tear gas, it's gonna suck every time, unless you're like one of those few that's like actually immune. So they needed every single officer on that defensive line that they established on the steps of the Capitol because they were just so outnumbered. But they kept having to pull back because they didn't have gas masks, they didn't have extra protection that was necessary to protect them, and so it was just screwed from the start.
Yeah, for sure. When you were there and you were like before all that happened though, you were in the crowd. I knew a girl that was there that went to. I probably know a few people that went, but I know at least one that went for sure because she was posting it on her Facebook, and it seemed from what I was seeing up until everything went crazy was that it was like almost like one of his rallies. Everybody was just coming
Yeah,
together. There was a lot of good times, and it
yeah.
also seems to me, that a good majority of the crowd was there to just do the rally, be peaceful, do their thing. And then just like we saw all for the last year over the summer, a fringe element of that broke out and did the more violent stuff. Is that kind of how you saw it? And also, did you hear like walking through the crowd, did you hear any like talk of any kind of violence upcoming, before everything went crazy?
Not really. In terms of hearing anything specific, I wasn't in the crowd for over to because like I said, I took the metro. So
Mm-hmm.
and really, I think that most of the people. I mean, it's a rough estimate, but around 300 to 400 people actually went inside the building, the Capitol building, the main Capitol building. I would say outside of the people who were the first ones in, breaking the windows, rushing in first, I really don't think any of them had any plan to actually go inside because you would assume, oh yeah, they wouldn't just let people, or they wouldn't be able to breach inside. So I think they were really surprised at how far they were able to go.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. It seemed
And
like they were
again,
surprised. So some of them were like, "Holy shit!"
right? I mean, and then because I got inside the rotunda, and half the people were just looking around. They're being tourists at first because, like I said, I don't think that they were planning on being able to get as far as they did. And then once the cops came in, and that's when they started to become rioters and started to fight back against the police. It was a whole shit show. So I'm not saying that it was right for them to do that. I'm just saying that they were kind of in shock at how well
They thought they were going to be fighting
they.
back against police like most rioters do, and not be able to just walk right in.
Well, and that's it. Yeah, like the people that came in. I'm talking about the people that came in
Yeah,
after
yeah, yeah.
the initial. And so it was just. I mean, like I said, yeah, it was just fucked. I mean, that's really the only thing
There
I can
was
describe.
there's a lot of right wing conspiracy theorists that believe that Antifa started the riots on the Capitol, right? And that there were instigators in the crowd. As someone that has traveled and has been, covering riots for 5 years now, and I'm sure you've probably seen instigators go from riot to riot, or maybe seen some of the same faces in different kind of crowds, because there's some people that really do travel around and go to these different protests. Do you feel like there's any chance that that's even true? That is was not even maybe
So
not led by Antifa, but maybe instigated just to cause everyone else to go crazy at the same time.
so there's only one case that I know of that is John Sullivan. That's his name. He is a Black Lives Matter activist, and he filmed himself encouraging people to go into the Capitol and see how far they could take it. He filmed himself saying, "Oh yeah, we got to burn all this," referring to the paintings on the wall once they were inside. And so that's the only case that I'm aware of someone who was not a Trump supporter being an instigator or being violent in terms in that regard. The one thing you have to keep in mind is Antifa, they're terrible at a lot of stuff. But the one of the things that they're good at is they're good at hiding their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I'm saying. The reason why half the people have been arrested and charged is because they made no attempts to hide their identity. They were posting on Facebook. They were live streaming. It's like, hey, we're inside the Capitol, and they weren't covering their faces.
Mm-hmm.
which is something that Antifa is really good at doing, and that's why they're able to get away with a lot of their stuff, so that they're not identifiable. So
They're very disciplined in wearing all black and keeping covered.
right, and so the outside that one case, and we also know that who these people are, just because, like I said, they have been identified, and you look at their, and they're saying that, yeah, they're Trump supporters. I mean, that's just the facts of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it doesn't matter to me in terms of, like I said, how I covered it, right? Because I was there and I did my job. I know, hey, these people are Trump supporters or fighting cops. I mean, because that's what was happening. And so, yeah, there are a lot of, again, false narratives out there.
For sure.
But of course, thankfully, the mainstream media is really working hard to debunk that. Just none of the other false narratives that they propagated last year. But I mean, small victories, whatever. So that's just what happened. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Trump supporters were the main people rioting at the Capitol building. It's just how it was.
I agree. The only reason I even wanted to bring it up is because, dude, I know people that are kind of buying into that narrative for some reason, and I'm not sure why. And I think to find real unity in the country, people on the left, people on the right, we both got to call out the extremist points of view or the fringe narratives that are based on false accusations or whatever. We have to call those out and stop them, because that all that does is, one, it drives a bigger wedge in the country, and two, it really doesn't help your cause, because now you're giving ammo to the other side to say how bad of a person you are. Like, the Capitol Hill riots will be used for the next probably few elections to talk about how evil Republicans are from the Democrat side. It's just how it's going to be. That's just how politics are. So that's the only reason I wanted to kind of bring that up and, put that and I might get some kick or flat, some flack from people that listen to this podcast, because there's a lot of conservatives that listen to this podcast, but that's just the reality. And I want people to kind of buy into reality and quit listening to these bullshit narratives and get yourself some good, sources of information. Because if they're telling you that Antifa led that's a bad source of information. You need to move somewhere else. Now, what I would like you to talk about is, I was recording a podcast. I literally started recording, it seemed like, I guess, a few minutes before that riot started, and I stopped as it was kind of dwindling down. So I turned off hit the stop recording button, kind of tore my stuff down a little bit and turned the TV on, and all of a sudden I'm like, what the hell? What the hell's going on? Yeah. What was it like for you to be there and see people like you have video of people using gates as battering rams to try to bust doors down and stuff like that. What was it like for you to see that happening at the Capitol building?
Well, in one sense, it was just kind of par for the course. I mean,
yeah,
people rioting, that's been a news story for the better year now. At this point, I mean, May 24th, 25th is kind of the 1 year anniversary for the start of all that. But then, the other part was just oh my gosh, this is happening at the Capitol building. Yeah. I've been here lots of times. I've been in the area lots of times. I've been inside once or twice. I mean, this is just absurd. This is really bad. Why? And of course, I'm thinking, why the hell are the cops not more prepared? So, with that battering ram video, it was actually kind of funny, because the guy that was hitting the door, he wasn't doing anything because the door opened outward, not inward.
Oh God!
It was doing absolutely nothing, and of course, it's just one guy, and he's not hitting it that hard, and so
it's more theatrics than anything.
Well, I mean, it was still, I don't want to say it was theatrics, but he wasn't having the effect he probably wanted to have.
Should have checked his hinges.
So it was really funny, because when he pulled back after hitting it a few times, that's when the cops opened it just a little bit and just let loose this giant cloud of the most powdery tear gas I have ever encountered in my time. There are still, to this day, on my plate carrier, there is still this powdery tear gas that makes me sneeze and cough every time I put on the damn thing.
Oh, really?
And I've tried to wipe it off, and it just got into all little cracks and crevices. I don't know what they were using I've never had encountered that thick of a, because usually gas, right? It's gas,
Hmm.
it dissipates, but this was like a heavy powder. But so that got that guy to stop. But it was just really funny because you just see the door just open just like a little bit and just um,
At that point, the woman had not been shot yet, right? On the Capitol by
yes,
she had
yes.
been.
I was when she was shot, and I hadn't gotten inside yet. They were inside for close to like an hour and a half, give or take. Well, I mean, it took a lot longer for the police to declare it secure once again, but they were able to push the bulk of most of those people out after about an hour and a half. And at that point, that's when they finally had the numbers and the equipment necessary to actually fight back against this people.
Yeah,
So yeah, and that's one of the false narratives from the Democratic side, where yeah, Vice President Harris say we saw two systems of justice. Like they were violent towards the black people and the minorities during the peaceful protests from last year, and they just let the white people in for this riot. It's like, no, that's not what happened. The cops tried everything in their power to prevent them from breaking it. A lot, some of them have died as a result of well,
not we
the
don't even
sickening
know yet.
situations.
Yeah, it's in question now.
Well, yeah, yeah. Now that's more of a
Obviously,
question.
the riots were a source of him passing away, but the narrative of him being beat over the head with a fire extinguisher has since been proven false.
Right, yeah. We don't know. Well, and then even outside of him, two cops committed suicide who were at the scene. So, but yeah, so it's just like, no, that's not what happened. The the police used lethal force
Yeah,
at the Capitol.
yeah,
Someone got shot. Someone got, and so I was really surprised. More people didn't get shot. I will say that, but to say that they didn't use lethal force is just objectively not true. Um, and 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 when we're talking about what happened last year, you would actually notice there wasn't lethal force with that. I mean, half the
no,
reason
yeah.
why the riots were able to happen is because the police were so overwhelmed. And you also have to think that they don't want to inflame the situation any further. I mean, can you imagine
Well, in a lot of cities, the
the
police were marching with the protesters. You know, obviously not with the rioters in the evening time, but they were marching with the
right,
peaceful protesters. It's like we
right,
have to
right?
acknowledge who's
They weren't
peaceful and
shoot
who's not. Like who's a peaceful protester and who's a
right,
rioter.
and so it's just a complete false narrative that the BLM activists want to propagate, and it was bought up by the media in the days after, saying that, oh yeah, look, they let these people in, and they let the white people in, but they wanted to, so it's just that's just not the case. They used riot control techniques on rioters in both cases
For sure.
because they were rioting. I mean, it's just as simple as that, and to say otherwise is just not true.
Yeah. So, one, I want to say for anyone that's watching, if there's any questions you have while we're on, go ahead and drop those in the chat right now, and because you're like I said, like we've talked about, your coverage of riots has happened over the last 5 years. So, if anybody's got any questions about any of the stuff that Julio's talked about so far, please drop that in the chat while we're talking here. Now that the impeachment's complete, Trump was not indicted again or not convicted again.
Convicted, yeah.
Now that that's over with and we can kind of get back to normal, whatever that means, to like normal news cycle, what are 3 news stories that people haven't been paying attention to because of all the noise that's happening that they should be paying attention to right now?
I would say just kind of looking at what the Democrats are going to do next, since they control all 3 branches of government, and so just kind of first and foremost the COVID relief stuff. I mean, there's a lot of shenanigans going on, as they typically do when vast amounts of money are in
Yeah,
play. That. So whenever I'm not covering riots or protests, one of the other things I like to focus on is immigration. I just did. I recently completed a tour in California and Arizona and Texas, documenting and reporting on the effects of the Biden administration's early executive orders relating to immigration. And obviously, it's a complete 180 from the Trump administration. And I'm actually going to the border again this week to do some follow ups because more stuff is coming down the pipeline. So I want to cover that. And so stuff relating to immigration is something that people definitely need to be aware of. Just because, I mean, this is a big effect, and also just because this problem, the issues surrounding immigration and things of that nature, it's not going away. It's not going away anytime soon. It's been become worse in some regards in terms of the numbers, because obviously, I mean, people are talking about the lockdowns and the devastating economic effects it's had in America, but I mean, you times that by 10 in terms of these really third world countries that people who had work, as minimal as it was, at least they had taken away. And so there's a lot more people a little bit more desperate and more willing to make the trek north to our border. So it's not going away. It's not going away anytime soon. And so I like to report on that. I don't know. We'll leave that as a I mean, censorship. I think that's something that it is talked about, but more people like to think it's just conspiracy. It's not really true. It's like, well, I mean, when you realize how big of how much control these few tech companies have, it's kind of scary a little bit. And so I think people should be more aware about that and those effects.
100%. Yeah, man. Big tech, like people, I don't think people have it in their own mind. Like, imagine if Google just shut down, like they're like, fuck it, shut everything down right now. Like what that would do, to like the economy, or like, I don't know. It's just like they have such a far reach. Everyone has a cell phone, and every one of those cell phones, these big tech companies are tracking, and they can follow you. They know where you're at. They know everything about you. It's such a weird thing. I will say one story I think people should be aware of too, that I can't believe it's not getting more national attention, is the unemployment scam here in California, where the EDD is the department, is what they're called, but it's the Unemployment Bureau. Minimum $11 billion have been scammed out of California unemployment. That's a minimum of 25% of unemployment benefits that have been paid out were to gangs and overseas organizations and stuff like that. Not just those, but other, these criminal organizations and a ton of other scammers. But $11 billion of taxpayer money scammed out, and it's just not like, I can't believe it's not on the national news. Just like I can't believe this, it's kind of an ongoing story. It's because today I think Cuomo talked about it, but his whole hiding of the deaths in New York, those are like two big things that I've been trying to keep an eye on lately.
Well, it's because Democrats are full to.
Well, Gavin Newsom's about to get recalled,
and the mainstream media are buddies with them. So I mean, oh yeah, and then we got the recall thing.
They met their signatures, so it looks like it's going to happen.
Yeah, they met their signatures. So they want, obviously they said they want to get more signatures because just to really make sure that they have enough buffer to
for sure.
Ward off any maybe shenanigans from
because they're going to toss a bunch of them out for sure, but they got to keep that 1.5 million signature threshold.
1.5 million. So I don't know. We'll see. That should be interesting. I'm looking forward to see who runs, and we'll see what the elections come on about that. Just because, yeah, I mean, Gavin Newsom, he's terrible governor.
It's been crazy out here.
Wait, you say you live in? Oh yeah, you said you're in California. Right?
I'm in San Diego, man. So if you're down here at the San Ysidro border crossing, if you come down there, let me know. I'm like 10 minutes away.
Chula Vista. Yeah, no, I've been there before. Yeah, I mean San Diego and Orange County, like those are like one of the metropolis areas that is actually like worth living in California. But even then, it's like
It's becoming, yeah, it's becoming very less worth it, man. I'm highly considering leaving the state after I graduate from college here in the spring because I'm going to San Diego State University.
You probably should. My mom has become so red pilled because she lives in Los Angeles,
Oh yeah, it's
and so she's become so red pilled over over everything. And it's not like my mom was a Democrat, but she before she moved out to Los Angeles, she was,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, she's through and through Republican now after everything. After I mean, even especially afterwards, and a lot of people obviously because I mean they reached 1.5 million signatures for, so it's not just my mom, but a lot of people, and it was really interesting to see how you reap what you sow.
It's crazy,
In
man.
that
It's
regard.
the livelihood out here or the lifestyle out here. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I go wandering around at night with my camera, and it's sketchy sometimes, man. Especially up in LA, like the homeless fires and stuff. I mean, there's like 70,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County. San Diego County has 8,000. It's not as bad, but man, there's some areas you go down to, and it's just sad to see. You're just like, man, I can't believe one that this is like this, and two that it's being allowed. I mean, I've taken my kid to Balboa Park and gone to walk around that, and homeless people openly smoking meth or whatever they're smoking drugs. I don't know what it was. It wasn't weed, but they were smoking like meth or something. And just openly doing it, not even caring. Like when I'm sitting there staring at them, they kind of saw that I was, judging them. So I saw one of the dudes kind of tap the other guy to like put it away. But I'm like, dude, the fact that like I can't even take my kid to go walk around the park without seeing dudes fucked up on crystal meth or doing heroin or something like that. It's just sad, man. It's just sad. And when you say and you also combine that with the average home cost, I think in San Diego County is $650,000 for the average. That's the average house price. It's just crazy. Like the fact that I'm going to pay over $500,000 for a house where I'm sitting around homeless people, where I walk out on the streets, and because it never rains here, it smells like human urine and stuff like that. Like it's mind blowing. And people that don't know what I'm talking about, if you've never been to California, you've never seen it because it's not covered on the news. They need to look at Street People of Los Angeles on Instagram. Check that page out, or I think Street People of San Diego. I think they made one for that one too, something like that. But the stuff you see on those pages is just out of control. But I don't want to babble on about how bad California is. We'll go ahead and wrap this up. Is there anything you want to go over before we cut the stream?
Yeah, no, it's been a crazy year.
For sure.
We're looking forward to what happens next year. I mean, the Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, that trial is starting March 8th.
It's gonna be crazy.
We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that. I mean, obviously, if he doesn't get the punishment people think he deserves, might be busy again. So,
are you going to be there for that, for when the verdict's read? Are you going to cover that?
Maybe I will. Maybe I won't.
Never know, huh? See what's going on.
OPSEC.
I get it, man.
But yeah, no, it's the whole thing that we experienced last year was sad. I mean, obviously, George Floyd was upsetting and sad, and it just spiraled out of control really quickly. And really, what I like to kind of compare it to is after the Rodney King incident in '92, right?
Mm-hmm.
The riots didn't happen right away, right? They went through the trial, and yeah, the cops were let off pretty easily for what they did to him, and so that's when we then saw the riots happen. And to my knowledge, it was really only happening in Los Angeles. Now we fast forward to last year, and then you throw in more police scandals, more unfortunate incidents, and then you combine COVID, lockdowns, and the effects of that. I mean, America was just a powder keg
for sure
at that point, and something was going to happen, and it just happened to be that. And so, the guy hadn't even been fired yet. Shokin hadn't even been fired yet before things just went out. And then it spread to other parts of the country. A lot of. I remember it was that Friday where I was checking Twitter and I was saying, "Oh man, Atlanta's popping off, and New York City is popping off. Los Angeles is starting to pop off more." And so, it's just unfortunate that everything happened the way it happened. And yeah, I built up a lot of my career off of it now, and I'm not saying that it hasn't benefited me in some way, which is kind of hard to reconcile. But at the same time, I mean, the reason why is just because as documenting these major events in real time as being very important, and so I'm willing to risk it
For sure,
to
man.
to
I agree that it is definitely very important. I believe that people should see an unfiltered view of what's happening on the streets. I will say that I believe that people should follow a few, if whatever, get Twitter. If you want to get news as it's happening, Twitter is the place to be. So if you do happen to get on there and you're not following me, number 4 MER Action Guys, get on there and find some journalists that you find trustworthy and watch their feeds. And again, I found your feed randomly, not even knowing who you were, because you were covering what was going on in Kenosha. And then I was like, I appreciate raw footage from the ground and I can see what's actually happening. I don't need a talking head to come on TV and explain to me what's occurring when I can watch it for myself, and it's not just journalists that's recording these historic things that are happening. Regular people are.
everyday, yeah, everyday people. Yeah, I mean, a couple of videos from the Rittenhouse shooting, they were just from random people that were live streaming at the moment. So it's important.
I agree again that people. I agree again that this is very important work that you're doing, and I appreciate risking it, because it is a risk to go out there to some of these events and cover it in the manner that you have, like being in the mix of it, not from the outskirts in a safe position, but literally being in the mix of everything that's occurring. That's obviously put yourself in danger and stuff doing that. But you're providing such good information for those of us like me that like to watch it. For those that are interested in seeing more content from you, they can go to on your Twitter, Julio_Rosas11, or on Instagram, Julio A. Rosas, and check those out. Is there any other social media or pages you want to plug before we cut this?
Yeah, just check out Town Hall. We got great content on the site, and you can become a subscriber. You get access to more articles, more content, and you have the added benefit because some of the money that's used from our VIP membership program goes towards my travel, because I mean travel is expensive, and especially at the frequency which I do travel, so that's always greatly appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, if there's no questions from the audience, I want to thank everyone for tuning into the live stream that did. For those that are only listening to this, make sure you subscribe on YouTube so you can also get notifications and stuff about the live stream. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. That's the only place that I can get reviews, I believe. I don't think any other platforms allows it, and that helps me bump up in the ratings. As always, make sure to check out my Instagram at Former Action Guys, at J Kramer Graphics, and my website, jkramergraphics.com. And again, Julio, man, thanks again for coming on. I look forward to, in the future, well, maybe after this summer, hopefully it's not as crazy, but if it is, I'll love to have you back on and you can tell us about some of your stories, man.
We'll see what happens.